Sister Superior Iolanthe Vessik, of the Order of the Weeping Rose, had killed 904 heretics by her own count. She had stopped counting the Xenos long ago. She had never, not once in 30 years of war, doubted the shape of her own soul. That changed on the ash world of Verrenhal in the third week of the siege, when the cult of the Rose-That-Never-Wilts opened a door that should not have existed. The Weeping Rose were not a famous order. They held no relic worth the saga, guarded no shrine. The administratum bothered to catalogue. They kept a single convent on a rain-soaked moon nobody visited, and they went where the ecclesiarchy sent them, which was usually somewhere already dying. Verrenhal was dying when they arrived. It was an ash world, a forge-adjacent scrap of rock that fed promethium to 3 hive systems, and it had gone quiet on the Vox 11 days before the sisters made plain at fall. Quiet, on an imperial world, meant one of two things. Either everyone was dead or everyone had found something worse than death and decided they liked it. It was the second thing. Iolanthe led 40 sisters and a company of penitent auxilia down through smoke the color of a healing bruise, into hablocks, strung with banners that had once said "Praise the Emperor," and now, restitched, thread by thread over God Emperor knew how many nights, said something else. The cultists had not defaced the old words, they had improved them. That was the detail that stayed with her, not the corpses, not the murals, but the neatness of the needlework. Whoever had done it took pride in the stitching. She found the first shrine in a subhab that had once been a communal refectory. The cultists had torn out the long tables and replaced them with mirrors, hundreds of mirrors, scavenged from habs across 4 districts, arranged in a rough spiral so that anyone standing in the center saw themselves reflected back at every possible angle, endlessly, from every side at once. In the middle of the spiral sat a woman in what had been, before the frost damage and the self-inflicted lacerations, an extremely beautiful ceremonial gown. She was still alive. She was smiling at her own reflections with an expression of total, undiluted satisfaction, and she did not stop smiling when Iolanthe's flamer took her head off. "Burn the glass too," Iolanthe told her squad. "All of it." Sister Constanze, the youngest of them, hesitated with her hand near a mirror frame, and Iolanthe saw, just for a half-second, her novice's reflection catch the light in a way that made the girl's face look older, sharper, more like a face that had already decided things about itself. Constanze pulled her hand back like she'd touched a promethium coil. "Sister," Iolanthe said. "Nothing, Superior." Constanze did not look at the mirror again. Good instinct. Iolanthe filed it away and did not think about it further, because she had 400 more meters of hablock to clear and a war to win. And she did not yet understand that the war she thought she was fighting was not the war that had actually started. The cult of the Rose-That-Never-Wilts worshipped nothing so crude as pain. Iolanthe had fought chaos before the blood cults, with their hooks and their howling, the plague vovens with their patient, loving rot. She knew what those looked like. She had a liturgy for those. This was different, and it took her 3 days of close, ugly fighting through the Ashab warrens to understand how they did not torture their captives, they flattered them. She found a chapel, she refused to call it a temple, where a dozen townsfolk sat in a circle, uninjured, unbound, listening to a preacher in stolen ecclesiarchy vestments describe in loving and specific detail every talent and virtue each of them possessed. He knew their names, he knew what they were good at. He told a boy of maybe 14 that his hands were the most beautiful hands he had ever seen on a mortal creature, and the boy wept with a kind of joy Iolanthe had never seen on a human face in a war zone. And when she put a bolt round through the preacher's skull, the boy screamed at her like she had murdered his own father. That was the shape of it. Slaanesh did not need chains. Slaanesh needed a mirror and an audience. Iolanthe wrote as much in her field report that night, by candlelight. In the cramped confessional booth, the sisters had converted into a command post. "The enemy corrupts through excellence, not agony," she wrote. "It does not ask its victims to suffer. It asks them to be seen perfectly, completely seen, and it never stops looking." She underlined the last line twice, then sat for a long moment with the stylus in her hand, because she had realized, with the cold clarity of a woman noticing a wound she hadn't felt land, that she had enjoyed writing that sentence. She had enjoyed how well turned it was. She burned the page and rewrote it plainer. Canoness Reverend Militant Yoselt Dreger arrived on the 4th day with the rest of the order's strength. 40 more sisters and 3 exorcist tanks, and with her came the confirmation Iolanthe had been dreading. This was not a rogue cult. This was a bridgehead. Somewhere beneath the Ashab foundations, in the old geological survey tunnels the Forge World engineers had abandoned 2 centuries back. Something had worn the fabric of reality thin enough to let a sliver of the Prince of Excess lean through. "We seal it," Dreger said, in the flat voice of a woman who had sealed such things before and lost people doing it. "We do not parley, we do not listen to what it offers. Sister Superior Vessik, you have point." Iolanthe had led the order into worse holes than this one. She said yes because saying yes was the only answer that had ever made sense to her. And she gathered her squad Constanze and old sister Ambrose, who had buried 2 convents worth of sisters, and still sang hymns off-key on purpose to make the younger girls laugh. And the twins Pallas and Perpetua, who fought like they shared one nervous system, and they went down into the dark together because that was what the Rose did. They went down together and ideally they came back up together, though the Order's own hagiographies suggested that second part was optional. The tunnel walls were warm. That was the first wrongness. Not heat like fire, but heat like a held hand, like breath on the back of the neck. The lumen packs on their armor threw a pale, honest light, and the light did not want to be there. It kept catching on things that seemed at the edge of vision to be more colorful than the tunnel had any right to contain. Veins of something that glittered like oil on water, patterns in the rock that resolved, if you looked too long, into shapes that were almost faces, almost beautiful. Ambrose started singing under her breath, off-key on purpose, the way she always did. And it helped. It grounded the squad in something plain and ugly and human. Iolanthe was grateful for it in a way she didn't say out loud. They found what was left of the geological survey team about 200 meters in, not dead. Worse, the 6 engineers were seated in a loose ring around a fissure in the tunnel floor, from which a faint rose-gold light pulsed like something breathing. And each of the engineers had, with tools scavenged from their own survey kits, been carving elaborate, gorgeous patterns into their exposed skin, not wounds. Art Iolanthe had seen enough Imperial iconography to recognize devotion when she saw its shape, however monstrous its content, and what she saw on those 6 ruined ecstatic faces was devotion. For the Emperor's mercy, Constanze breathed, and one of the engineers turned toward her voice and smiled. The way you smile at someone you've been waiting to meet? You have good bones, the engineer said to Constanze conversationally, as if they were at a garden social. Better than mine. I'd have liked to see what you'd carve, given time. Perpetua put a bolt round in him before he finished the sentence. The other 5 didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't scatter, just kept working on themselves with the same rapt, private satisfaction, and it took the whole squad weapons out to finish it, and none of them enjoyed it. And Iolanthe made herself watch each shot land so that she would never let herself forget that this had been necessary and not what it had felt like, which was closer to interrupting something than ending it. The fissure kept pulsing. Rose gold. Patient. It spoke to her that night, when the squad made a cold camp 40 meters short of the fissure and Draeger's main force was still 6 hours out with the breaching charges. It did not speak the way demons spoke in the cautionary pamphlets the ecclesiarchy printed for novices. No hissing, no promises of power, no crude bargains over souls. It spoke like a friend who had been thinking about her for a long time and had at last found the right moment to say so. You write beautifully, it said, in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere just behind her own thoughts. That line about the mirror and the audience, you should have been a poet. You would have been extraordinary. Iolanthe kept her eyes on the fissure and her hand on her bolt pistol and said the litany of silence under her breath, the one the Order taught for exactly this circumstance, the one that was supposed to close the mind like a door. It did not close. The voice simply waited, patient as rust, until she finished, and then continued as if she hadn't spoken at all. You have spent 30 years making yourself smaller, it said, filing your edges off so you'd fit inside the shape they gave you. I only want to know, just to know nothing more, what you would have been if anyone had ever once told you that you didn't have to, she thought, unbidden of the boy with the beautiful hands, weeping over a dead preacher. She thought of the woman in the mirror spiral, smiling as the flamer took her. She had told herself those people were weak, were hollow, were vessels waiting to be filled because there had been nothing in them to begin with. Standing in the warm dark with that voice draped over her thoughts, like a well-fitted coat, she understood for the first time that they had not been hollow. They had been listened to. Perfectly, completely. For the first time in their lives, something had looked at them and found them worth an audience. Nobody had ever told Iolanthe Vessik she was extraordinary. She had never asked. She had been raised from age 6 to want nothing that wasn't the Emperor's to give, and she had believed, with her whole self, that this was virtue and not merely the shape of the mold she'd been poured into. Just look, the voice said, gently, and it was not a command, it was an invitation. The kindest invitation she had ever received, and some small ash-world dwarfened part of her that had been silent for 30 years leaned toward the fisher's rose-gold light, like a plant leaning toward a window. Superior. Constanze's hand closed on her shoulder guard. Real, cold, ceramite, ungentle, entirely uninterested in whether Iolanthe found it beautiful. Superior, your eyes have gone strange. Look at me, not the light. Iolanthe looked at her. Constanze's face was not extraordinary. It was young and frightened and stubborn, and it had a scar over one eyebrow from a training accident 2 years back that had healed a little crooked. And it was the most honest thing Iolanthe had looked at in what felt like a very long time. She said the litany of silence again. This time she meant every word of it. And this time, not because the litany was stronger, but because she chose actively and with her whole broken and ordinary will to mean it. The door closed. The voice did not go away. It simply stopped being answered. And a voice that isn't answered, she would write later in a report she did not burn, is only whether you can stand in it. You do not have to listen to it. Thank you, sister, she said to Constanze, and did not explain further, because some things the order taught you to carry alone, and this was going to be one of them for the rest of her life. Draeger's charges sealed the fissure 4 hours later. It took the exorcist's full hymnal cycle and every ounce of blessed promethium the company carried, and the tunnel collapsed with a sound like a held breath finally released. And Verrenhal's Ashab districts were, in the driest sense the administratum's ledgers would ever record, pacified. Iolanthe filed her report. Honestly, she did not soften the part about the fissure or the part about what it had offered her, because the order's confessors needed the truth to do their work, and because she had decided, somewhere in that warm, dark tunnel, that hiding the shape of the temptation was itself a kind of surrender to it, a way of protecting an image of herself as someone who could never have been tempted at all, which was exactly the kind of flattering lie the thing in the fissure would have loved to leave planted in her. She was reassigned 6 weeks later to a Shrine World posting, routine, unremarkable, the sort of duty given to sisters whose files carry a small flag that says watch but do not doubt. She did not resent it. She understood it. Some wounds you carry visibly as scars others can bless. Others you carry the way she carried Verrenhal, quietly. Honestly checked against yourself every day like a blade you keep, sharp precisely because you know exactly how it could be turned. Constanze made Sister Superior 4 years later. Iolanthe pinned the rosette on her collar herself and said nothing about mirrors or fissures or hands, and did not need to. Some lessons are not spoken, they are simply carried forward, from one plain, stubborn, unextraordinary soul to the next, which is, in the end, the only kind of extraordinary the order has ever actually required. The mirror shows you what you want. The rose shows you what is true. Choose the second, even when it costs more. That was the whole of what she taught her novices. In the end, it was not poetry. She had decided a long time ago in a warm, dark tunnel that it didn't need to be.